I'm gonna be real with you right from the jump. You've probably seen like 15 Jack the Ripper documentaries already. YouTube's drowning in them. Netflix has 3. There's probably a TikTok true crime influencer right now doing their third Who Was Jack the Ripper video this month with some AI voice overlay and stolen footage. And I get it. You're thinking, why should I care about this one? Here's why. Because literally, everyone gets this story wrong. Everyone. The documentaries, the books, the experts with their leather-bound journals acting like they've cracked the case. They're selling you a story. A neat little package with a bow on top. We finally know who Jack the Ripper was. Except, we don't. We never did. We probably never will. And if one more person tells me it was the royal family, I'm going to lose my mind. We'll get to that disaster of a theory later, trust me. But if you actually want to understand what happened in Whitechapel in 1888, the real mess, the chaos, the incompetence, the tragedy, then hit subscribe right now because I'm about to walk you through this thing step by step. And I promise you, by the end of this, you're gonna be more frustrated than when you started. Not with me, with the case itself. With how badly the police botched it. With how society failed these women. With how we turned a tragedy into entertainment. So, yeah, subscribe. Because this is gonna be a ride. All right, context. And I know you're thinking, just get to the murders. But no, you need to understand Whitechapel first. Because if you don't get what this place was like, nothing else makes sense. Whitechapel in 1888 was, God, how do I even describe it? Imagine the worst neighborhood you've ever seen. The absolute worst. Trash everywhere. Sketchy people on every corner. You wouldn't walk through it alone at night. Now multiply that by 1,000 and remove all modern safety nets. No welfare system. No social services, no health care, nothing. This was a square mile, 1 square mile, packed with 80,000 people living in conditions that would make a modern slum look like a resort. We're talking families of 8, 9, 10 people crammed into a single room. And I don't mean a small apartment. I mean 1 room. 1 window if you're lucky. No bathroom, no kitchen, just a room. The smell alone, contemporary accounts describe it as unbearable. Sewage in the streets, rotting food, industrial waste from the docks, dead animals, and everyone's burning coal for heat, so add smoke and soot to the mix. You literally couldn't breathe properly. And here's the thing that drives me crazy when people talk about the Ripper's victims. They act like these women were making choices. Like they woke up one day and thought, you know what? I'm going to become a prostitute in the most dangerous part of London. No, these women were desperate. Most of them were in their 40s, ancient by Victorian working-class standards. They were alcoholics, because what else are you going to do when your life is that bleak? They were sleeping in workhouses or on the streets. And they were selling sex for 4 pence. 4 pence. That's the cost of a bed for 1 night in a doss house where you're sleeping in a room with 30 other people and the mattress hasn't been cleaned in 6 months. You know what society did about this? Nothing. Prostitute murders were background noise. The police barely investigated them. These women were disposable. Until someone started killing them in ways that were so brutal, so public, so in your face, that even Victorian society couldn't ignore it anymore. And that's when everything went sideways. Okay, so let's talk about who actually died. Because here's what pisses me off about most Ripper content. They treat the victims like props, like NPCs in a video game whose only purpose is to die dramatically, so we can talk about the killer. These were real people. They had lives, they had families, they had stories that didn't begin and end with how they died. Mary Ann Nichols, Polly, to her friends. She was 43. She had 5 kids. 5. She'd been married, had a relatively normal life at one point. Then her husband left her. She fell into alcoholism, and the whole thing collapsed. By 1888, she was bouncing between workhouses, sometimes sleeping on the streets, doing whatever she could to survive. Annie Chapman, 47 years old. She was an amputee, missing fingers on one hand, had chronic tuberculosis, was barely functioning. She made money selling flowers and crochet work when she could, but that wasn't enough, so, yeah. The night she died, she was kicked out of a doss house because she didn't have the 4 pence for a bed. She said, and this is documented, "I'll be back soon, don't let my bed." She was going to go earn the money. She never came back. Elizabeth Stride, Long Liz. She was Swedish, immigrated to London, survived a shipwreck on the way. She was 44, worked in a coffee house, claimed her husband died in a disaster. He didn't, they just separated. But she told people he died because, I don't know. Victorian social reasons, probably. She was described as neat, clean, well-spoken. The night she died, witnesses saw her with a man, apparently arguing. Then she was found with her throat cut. Catherine Eddowes, 46. She'd been in jail earlier that day, like literally 8 hours before she died, for being drunk and disorderly. They let her out at 1 a.m. By 1:45 a.m., she was dead. She was trying to earn money to pay her rent at a lodging house. That's it. That's all she was doing. And then Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest at 25, pretty by Victorian standards, Irish. She worked in a higher-class brothel at some point, but had fallen on hard times. She was behind on rent, owed money everywhere. The last person to see her alive said she was singing in her room that night. These women weren't monsters. They weren't cautionary tales. They were people who got dealt a bad hand in a society that didn't care if they lived or died. And someone decided to make absolutely sure they died. 3:40 a.m. Bucks Row, which is now called Durward Street, because who wants to live on Murder Street, right? Charles Cross, a cart driver, is walking to work. It's dark. It's foggy. London fog is no joke, by the way. You literally can't see more than a few feet in front of you. And he sees what he thinks is a tarpaulin or some trash lying in the street. Gets closer. It's a woman, Mary Ann Nichols, and her throat has been cut so deeply that her head is nearly severed from her body. Like, we're not talking a superficial wound. This was brutal, efficient, and meant to kill instantly. But here's where it gets weird. And when I say weird, I mean this is what made the police realize something was very, very wrong. Her abdomen had been opened, mutilated. And it wasn't random slashing. There were deliberate cuts. Someone had taken their time, or at least taken enough time to do this methodically. The police show up. They're confused. Prostitute murders happen all the time in Whitechapel, but not like this. Usually it's a robbery gone wrong, or a violent client, or just random violence. This was different. This had intent, method. The newspapers go absolutely insane. Whitechapel horror! Mysterious murder! They're selling papers like crazy because Victorians loved a good murder story, just like we do. But the police are thinking, okay, this is bad, but it's probably a one-off. Some psycho had a bad night. We'll catch him. It'll be fine. 8 days later, September 8th, Hanbury Street, Annie Chapman. Same thing. Throat cut. Abdominal mutilation. But worse, way worse. Internal organs removed. Removed. Her uterus was taken, part of her bladder, and they were arranged near the body. Now the police are freaking out, because whoever did this had anatomical knowledge. These weren't random cuts. You had to know what you were doing to remove specific organs in the dark, in an alley, in maybe 10 minutes before someone comes by. So they start thinking, a doctor? A butcher? A medical student? Someone who works with bodies? And that's when the theories start spiraling out of control. But before we get to the insane theories, and oh boy, they get insane, let me tell you about September 30th. Because that night was absolutely bonkers. September 30th, 1888. This night is so wild that I still can't believe it actually happened. 11:45 p.m., Berners Street. Elizabeth Stride's body is found in a yard next to a working men's club. Throat cut. But, and this is crucial, no abdominal mutilation. No organs removed. Just throat cut. Dead. The theory? He was interrupted. Someone was coming. Maybe the club members heard something, maybe a cart was approaching, and he ran. Just grabbed her, cut her throat, and bolted. Now, most serial killers, if they're interrupted mid-kill, they disappear. They lay low. They don't want attention. They go to ground for weeks, maybe months. Not this guy. This absolute maniac walks 3/4 of a mile, through the streets of London, covered in blood presumably, to Mitre Square. 45 minutes later, 1:30 a.m., Catherine Eddowes. And this time, he goes all out. Like he's making up for lost time. Throat cut. Obviously, that's his thing. But then the mutilation is extensive. Her face is cut up. Her eyelids are slashed. Her abdomen is opened. Organs removed. Kidney, part of her uterus, gone. The police are absolutely losing their minds. 2 murders, one night, and the second one is more elaborate than anything before. The public is in full panic mode. People are forming vigilante groups, and I don't mean organized neighborhood watches, I mean angry mobs with clubs looking for anyone suspicious. The newspapers are printing special editions. Everyone's terrified. And then something happens that either makes this case more interesting or way more complicated, depending on how you look at it. Someone starts sending letters. Okay, so starting in late September, the Central News Agency, basically a news service, starts receiving letters supposedly from the killer. And so do some newspapers. And the police. Hundreds of them eventually. Most are obviously fake. Trolls, basically. Victorian-era trolls with too much time and zero chill. But 3 letters stand out. And I'm going to tell you about them, even though I think they're probably hoaxes, because they're part of the mythology now. The Dear Boss letter arrives September 27th, 3 days before the double event. It's written in red ink, which is either creepy as hell or try hard. I can't decide. The writer says he loves killing, that he's going to keep doing it, that the police will never catch him. He jokes about clipping the lady's ears off and keeps the ears for the coppers. And he signs it, Jack the Ripper. That's it. That's where the name comes from. Not from the police, not from witnesses, from a letter that's probably fake. But here's the thing. The police don't release this letter to the public right away. They're skeptical. Then the double event happens. And suddenly that line about, next time I'll clip the lady's ears off and send them to the police, feels way more sinister because Catherine Eddowes' earlobe was partially cut. Could be coincidence. Could be the letter writer got lucky with their prediction. Or, then comes the Saucy Jackie postcard, October 1st, right after the double event. Claims credit for both murders. Says double event this time. Uses phrasing that was in the Dear Boss letter. The police release both to the public, asking if anyone recognizes the handwriting. Big mistake, because now the name Jack the Ripper is everywhere. Every newspaper, every conversation, and more fake letters start pouring in. Everyone wants to be the Ripper now, apparently. It becomes impossible to sort through what's real and what's not. But then there's the From Hell letter, October 16th, sent to George Lusk, head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, basically a neighborhood watch guy who's trying to catch the killer. This letter is different. It's barely literate. Grammar's a mess, spelling's off. Not theatrical like the others. And it comes with something attached. Half a human kidney. The writer says it's from Catherine Eddowes, says he fried and ate the other half. Now the police have to figure out, is this kidney actually from Eddowes? Is it even human? They get a doctor to examine it. He says it's human, it's been preserved in wine, and it's consistent with a 45-year-old alcoholic woman with Bright's disease, which Eddowes had. But consistent with isn't definitely from, could be from a medical school, could be from a hospital, could be from a morgue. Victorian London was drowning in corpses and body parts thanks to medical schools being shady as hell about where they got their cadavers. So are the letters real? Probably not. Most experts think they're hoaxes, maybe even written by journalists to sell papers, which would be absolutely on brand for Victorian journalism. But the damage is done. Jack the Ripper is now a celebrity, a myth, a monster with a name. And he's not done yet. Before we get to the final murder, and it's a rough one, smash that subscribe button because we're about to talk about why the police response to all this was such a disaster. And honestly, it's going to make you angry. All right, let's talk about the police. Because if you thought modern police investigations could be a mess, Victorian-era police work was like, imagine trying to solve a murder with your hands tied behind your back, blindfolded, while someone's actively sabotaging you. They had no fingerprinting, no DNA testing, no security cameras, obviously, no databases to cross-reference suspects, no phones to coordinate quickly. They're working with witness testimony, which is notoriously unreliable, physical evidence they don't know how to properly preserve, and theories pulled out of thin air. The lead detective is Frederick Aberline. He's actually competent, which is rare. He knows Whitechapel, worked the area for years, but he's fighting against his own department, against the media, against public panic, and against the fact that everyone and their grandmother has a theory about who the killer is. They bring in hundreds of suspects. Hundreds. Every butcher in London gets questioned because anatomical knowledge. Every doctor. Every medical student. Jewish immigrants because Victorian England was disgustingly anti-Semitic and they needed someone to blame. Anyone who looked weird or acted strange or was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they can't hold anyone. There's no evidence. Nobody actually saw the murders happen. Or if they did, they didn't realize what they were seeing until it was too late. So the police try undercover operations. They dress male officers as women to act as bait, which, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, is insane. You're putting your officers in danger, and you're assuming the killer is stupid enough to fall for it. They flood the streets with constables, hundreds of them, walking beats, checking alleys. But Whitechapel is a maze. Narrow streets, interconnected yards, 1,000 places to hide. And the killer knows this area. He's not some outsider stumbling around. He moves through Whitechapel like he lives there. They offer rewards for information. The problem? Everyone's informing on everyone else. Neighbors reporting neighbors because they don't like them. People making up stories to get the reward money. The police are drowning in useless tips. And then there's the internal politics. You've got the Metropolitan Police, Scotland Yard, handling the investigation, but you also have the City of London Police, different jurisdiction. Catherine Eddowes was killed in their territory. So now you've got two police forces who don't communicate well trying to solve connected murders. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. Plus, there's pressure from above. The Home Office is breathing down everyone's neck. Politicians want results. The Queen, Queen Victoria herself, is asking what's being done about these murders. The newspapers are tearing the police apart daily. And you know what the police do? They make it worse. They find writing on a wall. Famously, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." This was written in chalk, near where a piece of Catherine Eddowes's bloody apron was found. Could be from the killer. Could be random graffiti. Nobody knows. You know what the police do? They erase it before anyone can photograph it, before anyone can properly document it, because they're worried it'll cause anti-Semitic riots. Which, fine, that's a valid concern given the anti-Semitism in Victorian London. But you just destroyed potential evidence. This is the level of competence we're dealing with. Okay, deep breath. Because we need to talk about Mary Jane Kelly. And this is the murder it's different. It's worse. And it's the last one. November 9th, 1888. Miller's Court. A tiny courtyard off Dorset Street, which was known as the worst street in London, even by Whitechapel standards. Mary Kelly was 25, the youngest victim by far. She was pretty by Victorian standards, which is why she's the one that shows up in all the dramatic retellings. She had worked in a higher-class West End brothel at some point, but had fallen on hard times. By November, she was 4 weeks behind on rent at 13 Miller's Court, basically a single room she rented for 4 shillings a week. She's last seen alive around midnight, possibly with a client. Witnesses report hearing someone singing Irish songs in her room. The next morning, around 10:45 a.m., her landlord's assistant comes to collect the overdue rent. He knocks. No answer. He looks through the broken window. Long pause. I'm not going to describe in detail what he saw. The police photographs still exist, and they're genuinely disturbing. But I'll say this. Mary Kelly was mutilated beyond recognition. Almost every internal organ was removed. Her face was destroyed. The level of violence was so extensive that they could barely identify her. And here's what makes this different from the others. Time. The other murders happened in alleys, in public spaces, in maybe 10 minutes before someone might come by. The killer had to work fast. With Mary Kelly, he had privacy. He had her room. He could lock the door. He had hours, literal hours, to do whatever he wanted. The post-mortem examination takes hours. The doctors are horrified. The police are at a loss. This isn't just murder anymore. This is something else entirely. And then, nothing. The murders stop. Just like that. No more Ripper killings. No more letters. No more bodies. It's like whoever did this just vanished into thin air. Why? That's the question that's driven people insane for over 130 years. Did he die? Get arrested for something else? Move away? Was Mary Kelly always the intended target? And the others were just practice? Did he achieve whatever sick goal he had and stop? We don't know. And that's what makes this case so absolutely maddening. Okay, suspects. Because you know everyone wants to solve this case, right? Everyone thinks they've figured it out. And I'm going to walk you through the main suspects, and I'm going to tell you why most of them are nonsense. There are over 100 named suspects depending on which book or documentary you read. Over 100. That alone should tell you how little we actually know. Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher who drowned himself in the Thames in December 1888. He's a suspect because he killed himself around when the murders stopped. That's literally it. No evidence connecting him to any crime scene, No anatomical knowledge. No documented violence. Nothing. The police privately suspected him, but that seems to be based on Victorian-class assumptions. He was educated, troubled, therefore capable of planning elaborate murders. It's weak as hell. Aaron Kosminski, Polish-Jewish immigrant who ended up in an asylum. Some modern ripperologists, I hate that term so much, claim DNA evidence links him to one crime scene. Here's the problem. The DNA evidence was from a shawl, supposedly from one of the crime scenes. But the chain of custody is questionable. The DNA could be contaminated, and even if it's valid, it just proves a Polish immigrant was in Whitechapel in 1888, which, yeah, there were thousands of them. Plus, eyewitness descriptions of the killer vary wildly. Some say he was tall, some say average height. Some say dark hair, some say mustache. None of them consistently match Kosminski. Michael Ostrog, Russian-born thief and con man. The police named him as a suspect. Seems promising, right? Except he was in prison in France during the murders. Next, Francis Tumblety, American quack doctor. Flamboyant, had a documented hatred of women, collected preserved uteri in jars. Yes, really, that's documented. He was in London during the murders, was arrested for gross indecency, gay sex, basically, which was illegal, and fled to America right after. He's actually one of the more plausible suspects, had anatomical knowledge, had violent misogyny. His timeline matches. American police were watching him when he got back to the States. But still, no hard evidence connecting him to any specific murder. And now we get to the absolutely insane theories that make me want to scream. Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson. The theory goes that he was the Ripper because he had syphilis, or went mad, or was covering up an illegitimate child, or something. It changes depending on which conspiracy theorist you ask. This theory is based on literally nothing. Zero evidence. He wasn't even in London for most of the murders. His whereabouts are well documented because he was royalty. Every move was recorded. This theory exists because people love the idea of a royal scandal. It's complete fiction popularized by hack authors who needed to sell books. William Gull, royal physician, part of the same ridiculous conspiracy involving the royal family and Freemasons, covering up Prince Albert's illegitimate kid with some shop girl or whatever. Again, no evidence whatsoever. He was in his 70s and had suffered a stroke. The idea that this elderly, partially disabled doctor was running around Whitechapel at night murdering prostitutes is laughable. But it sounds dramatic, so people eat it up. Lewis Carroll, yes, the author of Alice in Wonderland. This theory is based on someone finding anagrams in his work that supposedly confess to the murders. I'm not even going to dignify this with a detailed response. It's insane. It's the equivalent of people thinking Paul McCartney died and was replaced by a clone because of backwards messages in Beatles songs. It's pattern-seeking gone haywire. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We don't know who Jack the Ripper was. We probably never will. The case is over 130 years old. Any physical evidence is long gone or contaminated. Witness testimony was unreliable even at the time. Anyone who was alive then is long dead. And honestly, the most likely explanation is the most boring one. You know what the Ripper probably was? Some local guy, a butcher, maybe, or a medical student who dropped out. Someone who knew Whitechapel's streets because he lived there or worked there. Someone who knew when the police patrols came through. Someone who could blend in because he looked like everyone else. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't playing 4D chess with the police. He was just violent and lucky in a place where life was cheap and the police were overwhelmed. And at some point, maybe November 9th, maybe earlier, he either died, got arrested for something unrelated, moved away, or just stopped. Maybe the Kelly murder satisfied whatever urge was driving him. Maybe he got scared. Maybe he got sick. Maybe he just aged out of it. That's it. That's the answer. And it's boring. It doesn't make for a good movie. You can't write a thrilling novel about some guy who got away with it because Victorian police work was terrible. There's no dramatic reveal, no shocking twist, no satisfying conclusion. But that's reality. Serial killers aren't Hannibal Lecter. They're not masterminds. Most of them are just damaged people who exploit opportunities. And in 1888 Whitechapel, opportunities were everywhere. The real tragedy, and if you've stuck with me this long, hit that subscribe button because we're about to wrap this up. The real tragedy isn't that we don't know who he was. The tragedy is what the case reveals about society. Then and now. So why do we care? Why are there literally thousands of books, hundreds of documentaries, walking tours, conferences, online forums all dedicated to these 5 murders from 1888? Part of it is the mystery. We're hardwired to want answers. Unsolved problems drive us nuts. Our brains hate ambiguity. We want closure. We want to understand. We want to solve the puzzle. Jack the Ripper denies us that, and it's infuriating. But I think there's something deeper and more uncomfortable going on here. The Jack the Ripper case is fundamentally a story about society failing its most vulnerable people. Those 5 women died because they were poor, because they were women, because they were alone, because the system that should have protected them didn't give a damn until a killer made it impossible to ignore. And you know what? That's still happening. Right now. Today. We still have populations we ignore until violence forces us to pay attention. We still have investigations where resources depend on whether the victim is deemed worthy. When a middle-class white college student goes missing, it's national news. When a homeless drug addict or a sex worker disappears, it barely makes the local paper. The problems the Ripper case exposed never went away. We just got better at pretending they don't exist. And there's also the mythology of it. Jack the Ripper is the prototype for every fictional serial killer that came after. He's the original boogeyman of the modern age. The first to get a media circus. The first to become famous not despite being unknown, but because of it. We turned a tragedy into entertainment. We made a monster into a legend. And maybe that's the most disturbing thing about this whole case. Not what happened, but what we did with it afterward. So here's where we land. 5 women murdered in 1888. Killer never caught. Case never solved. Theories ranging from plausible to absolutely deranged. The real Jack the Ripper was probably someone boring. A local man who knew the area, had enough anatomical knowledge to do what he did, and got incredibly lucky that the police were incompetent and Whitechapel was a maze of dark alleys. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't supernatural. He wasn't royalty. He was just a violent person who exploited a broken system in a broken place. But here's what I want you to take away from this. And if you made it this far, seriously, subscribe, drop a comment, tell me if I'm wrong about something. Here's what actually matters. Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Those names, those women. They deserve to be remembered as human beings, not as props in someone else's horror story. They had lives, they had families, they had dreams and fears and favorite foods and songs they liked to sing. Their tragedy isn't that they died unsolved mysteries. Their tragedy is that they lived and died in a society that didn't care about them until their deaths became sensational. And if we're still talking about Jack the Ripper 136 years later, maybe we should be asking ourselves, what does our fascination with this case say about us? Are we learning from it? Are we doing better? Because right now, today, there are people living in situations just as desperate as Whitechapel 1888. There are women and men selling their bodies because they have no other choice. There are investigations being botched because the victims aren't considered important enough. The Jack the Ripper case isn't just history, it's a mirror. And what we see in that mirror should make us uncomfortable. So subscribe if you want more content like this. Real, messy, uncomfortable truth about true crime cases. Comment with your thoughts. Tell me if you think I missed something. Tell me if you disagree. Because the conversation about Jack the Ripper isn't really about solving the case anymore. That ship sailed a century ago. It's about understanding what the case reveals about human nature, about society, about how we treat the vulnerable and how we mythologize violence. And that conversation? That's still very much unsolved. Thanks for watching. Now go think about what you just learned and maybe do something good in the world. These 5 women deserved better than they got. Let's try to do better for the people who need it now.